caucus, we were able to bring in a legislation ensuring female representation, 25% representation at the local government level. And right now it stands at around 23%. The patriarchal society, and also the violence involved in the political culture in our parts of like in the Asian region, will not permit women to sort of enter politics voluntarily. And also there's no system through which a woman, even though she wants to do politics, there's no system for her to enter politics, because most of the political parties, you have to, if you have to face an election, you have to be a member of a party and you have to work through the party system. And most of the time, the major parties, there's no room for women. The women are confined to the women's movement. And women's movements also try to, support male candidates. Even in nominations, women will not sort of get nominations easily. The nomination boards may not have women. So the main party structures do not have office bearers. The most of these are dominated by men. And also the society also will not look at a woman in politics favorably. We have issues with attitudes, and because the violence and also the money involved in campaigns, very often a woman will think twice about entering this field. So however, the women who have entered politics have remained in the system because they have proved themselves to be successful. So still we are facing with the challenge of increasing representation both at national and provincial level. Of course, the new law which was passed in Parliament has also ensured women's representation by 25% at the provincial level, but at national level, we are still struggling hard. The Women's Caucus, we have 12 members. We have submitted a proposal to the committee drafting the new constitution to ensure a representation, to ensure gender equality between 30 to 70%. When it comes to other leadership roles, women have fought themselves based on their education, based on their qualities, based on their experience, based on their skills. They have been able to rise up, but with difficulty. When there's for leadership position, when a male and female compete, there's a preference that the male gets the leadership position. So we have a major issue with attitudes as well. So it is still a challenge, for women in Sri Lanka to enter into leadership positions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fernando Pole. It's a very sobering answer, and it's yet another reminder that patriarchy is very much entrenched in the way that women and men are approaching politics, where the financing, where the attitudes are always favoring men. Dr. Kumaraswamy.
Well, thank you. Well, my experience, of course, is not in politics. So the leadership position of women, mainly I've been in the NGO sector. I've done some work in the state sector and also in the international sector. I must say in the NGO sector, I've been in male-headed NGOs. The issue was not so stark. There were problems, but it was much more of a collaborative decision-making, and I never felt it so much. But both in the state sector and the international sector, first I noticed that if you're asked to be someone prominent in the state sector and the international sector, it's usually on women's issues or children's issues. Now, even with the UN, I was asked for children and armed conflict or special rapporteur on violence. They would never say, come and be head of peacekeeping or come and do something on, so in my generation, we were always assigned to women, children, elderly, that kind of issue. That's the first thing I've noticed. Secondly, I noticed at all these meetings, especially of the high, like what they would say, the cabinet level at the UN or whatever, I found, or even at when we were in Sri Lanka at various meetings, it's very difficult for women to be heard because the men really don't hear you. If you speak, I find they just continue to speak to each other, and it's very rare that they listen to the woman. They just ignore or just pretend they're not there or whatever. And I think the reason, and then you have to either, I've noticed many women become silent and afterwards don't speak. Others become stronger and firmer and louder, and then they're considered, viragos or very, very strong women. So these are some of the things I've noticed by being in leadership positions at the state and national level. The other thing I just wanted to say is my colleagues who began with me at lower levels, etc., those who got married, many of them just fell away. They stopped competing. They couldn't. They had children they wanted to take care of. And I was unmarried, of course. And if you look at the statistics, women are there, in my generation at least, at the middle. They're the legal officers and the people in corporations who can go home after 9 to 5. They can't stay till midnight and 2 in the morning because they have children at home. And so they stop competing, and they don't go to the very top of there's active discrimination also, but it's also that they stop competing because of the dual burden of family and work.
Indeed, and it's again very sobering, especially for us who are serving under the blue flag, and we are expected to fend for equality and fight for it. Still, the ecosystem does not provide women and men with the same opportunities to advance, to be retained, and to move up the ladder in the system. And we all know that for the past 70 plus years, the UN was never gender equal. It was only a couple of years ago when there was parity at the Undersecretary General level and the Assistant Secretary General level. But even at that level, if we dig deeper, we do find that 90% of the financial resources of the United Nations are still in the hands of men, because those are the ones who are heading the big organizations, the UNDPs and the WFPs and the UNHCRs, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we still have a long way to go there. Another question, and maybe if we can start with you, Dr. Kumaraswamy, and then we go to Dr. Fernandopoulos. As you have advanced in your respective careers, have you felt a change in perceptions of women in power locally and globally? Either way, why do you think that is?
Well, I think if you think of when we were growing up, women in power were, well, there was our Prime Minister, Sri Bandanaike, but more in the sort of international consciousness were Margaret Thatcher, Indira Gandhi. They were all considered the men in the cabinet. And so the role model, the women were acting like men and as strong as them and in the same kind of strong man, strong woman decision-making style. But to me, what has been really interesting about this pandemic has been the women leaders who have come to the fore. Well, Jacinda Ardern, then we have Katrin Jakobsdottir of Iceland, we have Sanna Marin of Finland, Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan, all these people who were presidents or prime ministers who are lower key and who got their country through this pandemic very successfully, very target-oriented, goal-oriented, with a collaborative team, very inclusive. They brought everyone. If you think of the way Justin Ardern responded also to the Christchurch, with empathy, zero tolerance. So they seem to have a kind of a feminist leadership style, which was interesting to me. And I thought that was a stark difference to the way the women in the 60s, Golda Meir, all these were just power. So I think whether they did it consciously or whatever, I found it very interesting that their style of decision making, more inclusive, more collaborative, more target oriented, far less bravado and all this kind of thing. And I think to some extent they established a kind of feminist leadership model, at least with regard to the pandemic.
Very much agreed. And I remember Madame Michelle Bachelet, the first Undersecretary General of UN Women, once told us that she was not considered by her people because she was the president of Chile twice. She was not considered as a serious candidate for presidency when she was the Minister of Health. She was not looked upon when she was the Minister of Education. She was only considered as a president when she took up the position of the Minister of Defense. So in somehow to be a woman in a man's world. So you have to take up a certain persona to be able to show and substantiate to your constituents that you can lead. And it's really very refreshing, as you rightly said, to see the silver lining in COVID, where feminist leadership have rose to the occasion. Dr. Fernando Pule.
Yes, I think during this pandemic, the countries headed by women leaders have done equally well, or maybe even better than some of their counterparts, like New Zealand, Germany, and then Norway. I know most of these countries, the women also have delivered well. So the issue is now in our context, the Sri Lankan context, people when the women in leadership positions, when they take decisions, when they implement certain projects, they are a bit reluctant to admit that the women are also capable, the women are successful, women are also as effective as men, because of the women's priorities, the priorities of both. So sometimes it's different when it's a woman. They're very sensitive. They sort of prioritize funds for women's activities, children's activities, and where funds are essential. The prioritization may be different, but they have delivered. They have been very successful. Now, our own example, Madam Sirimao Bandarnaike, she was a very good leader in the generation, say, before me. She was a strong decision maker. And also globally, there have been very successful leaders. So when you're strong, the people tend to compare. They say she's like a man. If a man is weak, they say you're like a woman. So the people think that women are weak. I mean, physically we may be weak, but when it comes to decision making, women are also capable of taking correct decisions, right decisions. Maybe the decisions what they take may benefit the majority of the people, the vulnerable sectors in the population. So this is again some sort of there's an attitudinal issue with very often the patriarchal societies. When women decide, their priorities are different. It's beyond infrastructure. They look at human capital, they look at the health, they look at the well-being of the women, they look at the well-being of the children, they look at the well-being of the underprivileged, the disabled. So therefore the women have proved themselves to be successful leaders. So even in Sri Lanka, our health minister, Honorable Pavitra, is doing a wonderful job in controlling COVID. And even in the COVID control, there are so many women in the forefront: doctors, nurses, the paramedics, the women who fearlessly take care of the patients. So the women, in their own style, they deliver. Of course, physically, we cannot fight with men, but in decision making, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Fernando Pule. And going back to the politics in Sri Lanka, you've talked about the attitudes, you've talked about the financing. But what are the other some deeper reasons for why women are still not in politics at the level we would like to see? We see women progressing in professional fields, medicine, commerce. Is there a difference in why political and policy areas remain more closed off to women? What are your thoughts, Dr. Fernandopoulos?
Yeah, in politics, it is very difficult for a woman to get in. It's dominated by males, and the males are not. Males think that males can do better than women when it comes to politics. And then you have to, the campaign financing and also the violence involved in politics. People also they perceive men to be, better than women. But now, the thinking is changing gradually. Now women also are realizing that more women should be in politics at the decision making levels. But overall, it's a male dominated field. The party structures are headed by men. Men decide whom to nominate as candidates. They will of course give preference to males because they have finances, they also have power, muscle power. So women are sidelines. As I mentioned earlier, the nomination boards do not have females. So unless some affirmative action is taken, unless there's some sort of law to say that certain percentage of candidates should be females, and certain electorates you should have female candidates, and of course the national list 50% should be given to females. Unless some affirmative action is taken, it will be very difficult to get more women into the system, because there are women who are interested but they have no opportunity. So unless you have some sort of political background, it's very difficult to enter into our system. So unless some affirmative action is taken, like it 25, like the law which was brought in to ensure representation at local government body, I think we have to take affirmative action for a short period until women have equal playing field.
Thank you. Maybe that is a segue to my following query or question, Dr. Kumaraswamy. What does the feminist perception of gendered power dynamics tell us about why women are excluded from power and why women need to be meaningfully and equally represented in places of power?
Well, I think if you take politics, especially that kind of power, I think, as Dr. Fernandopoulos said, first, I think there's aversion of women to go into politics, whether it's because of violence and dirty and it's thuggish, or there are not enough role models. I think worldwide there's generally an aversion to go into politics unless they can be persuaded. Once they see many men and women in politics, they might come forward. But at the moment, they only see very few. Secondly, I think the party leadership, they argue that the voters are biased and they won't vote for women, so we'll lose the election, which then feeds into anyway the fact that they're probably very prejudiced anyway, and they're just using this as a front for prejudice and discrimination, and that they just don't want to give it to women. So you don't know how much is valid and how much is part of discrimination. And there's a boys' club that develops many of these political parties, and from which women are excluded, as you know, and not only politics and everything usually. So I think affirmative action is absolutely necessary, as Dr. Fernandopoulos said, a quota, and we have to fight for that at every level. But why is it important that women be represented? I mean, there's just the basic fairness. 50% of the population surely must have 50% of the seats, at least 30%, if not 50%. I mean, just inherent concepts of fairness. But now I notice that women are going even further, saying, okay, it's also that institutions tend to be more operationally effective if women are there. I mean, I've been in the field of women, peace, and security, and it's shown very clearly whether it is a peace process, whether it is peacekeeping, whatever. The fact that women are there gives you a holistic and more sustainable solution. As Dr. Fernando Pérez said, women deal with health and education and all those other issues, which just men in a peace process would not even discuss. So bringing women in brings a far more sustainable, and actually negotiators behave better when women are in the room. So that dynamic is extremely important, I think, and the fact that the institutions become operationally more effective, even militaries, especially in their peacekeeping role, is another reason why women should be, and also women's identification. Mrs. Bandanaka, I remember I was just reading something about her in the 1960 election. When she won, the people who mobbed her were women. They were so thrilled that they had the first woman prime minister. They're the ones who came out in large numbers and mobbed her. So I think women, like Kamala Harris, also you have, all these young girls being shown by their mothers, look what you can become if you're a minority and a woman and you aspire to it. So I think it's really important to allow young women to have that identification with that, to say that you can be anything you want. I think so. These are the reasons why I feel women should be represented in positions.
Thank you so much. And back to you, Dr. Fernandopoulou. Looking at Sri Lanka's actual progress over the years, what, in your view, have feminist and or women leaders within political institutions, as well as civil collectives, accomplished and influenced in terms of legal and policy reform and progress?
Of course, the feminists, the civil societies, the women's organizations, they have been supporting women's empowerment in politics. Actually, they were also instrumental in bringing in this 25% representation at local government level. They were also instrumental in training the grassroots level women leaders, identifying the potential leaders. And once they were nominated into local government, they were also they had awareness programs, training programs about the local governance, the bylaws, their responsibilities, and they are further supporting the women's caucus, the women parliamentarians to increase representation at parliamentary as well as provincial levels. They have been advocating, they have been lobbying. They also have been supporting our campaigns behind, not like in the forefront, but they have been encouraging women to vote for a woman. So likewise, they have been supporting, but what I think is the feminists, the women, the civil societies, the women's organization, we also should have male champions to, advocate and lobby for this cause. So until the mindsets of the males change, it will be very difficult to increase representation. And also we have to change the attitude in the society, the voters as well, because they also should be looking for whom they should vote, the candidates, like, not the, they look at the candidates from the perspective of their power, monetary spending power, and also to get favors done once they are in governance. It's not so. But the voters also should be educated on, what to look for in when they vote for a candidate. Because right now, I don't think the politics is very popular in our parts of the world, especially in Sri Lanka, even educated men will not enter politics because, you know, very often it's a very negative public perception. So you have to be very strong, you know, to be in this system. And when it comes to women, it is very difficult because women are not supported by some of the male colleagues and maybe even the leaders. So therefore the women who are in politics should be sort of, you know, supported. They should be empowered, and also we have to lobby for our the male colleagues, especially the party hierarchy, the party leaders. Unless they change, it will be very difficult to change the system.
Thank you so much. More work on and with party leaders is a good start, and we think how can we move on from there. Dr. Kumaraswamy, the Women, Peace and Security agenda is one that is very close to your heart, and it will be highlighted in the Generation Equality Forum in Paris. And as we all know, it's very, very relevant to Sri Lanka as a post-conflict country with many issues still being resolved. Part of the thinking behind the Security Council resolution and the continuing Women, Peace and Security agenda is that the meaningful leadership of women is vital for genuine and sustained peace. Why? What can be said about women and peace building in Sri Lanka from national government to community levels?
Well, I think women, peace and security, one part of it is to make sure that during peace processes and peace building and all, women are at the table in equal measure. But a lot of women, peace and security now is about women peace builders. And women in the community that are doing work toward building peace. Now, but when we think, even in Sri Lanka, we had movements that had to do with peace. There was a Women for Peace movement in the 1980s and 1990s that helped pave the way for peace talks. And then, of course, peace talks collapsed. But at least there was such a movement to some extent. And then there was the Mothers Front with the JVP, you know, women whose children had been taken away or disappeared. They got together and worked together. So women in Sri Lanka, like in Liberia, as you know, so many cases in the community have been very active with regard to peace and justice issues relating to women, peace and security. But I think now, for me, where I think of the North and the East is that the whole issue, not only in Sri Lanka but internationally, the whole issue of the political economy of peace and security, that I don't think is discussed enough in the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So then you have conflict and post-conflict, and then, you know, what you do is make everybody a seamstress or a beauty beautician or a hairdresser, and you train them in these skills, and then you let them out in these basically low-skill jobs, low-income jobs, and then you give them microcredits, and then they go into debt. So nobody has really thought about development in post-conflict society and women's ability to take part in the decision-making of that development in their areas, and also having programs that'll, like bringing in high tech. You know, why not introduce them into technology? Why make them into seamstresses? Why not introduce technology and other things as training? So there are a whole host of issues related to post-conflict society and women's movement that are absolutely necessary, and even in Sri Lanka, which we need.
And
in other words, I'm saying we need women leadership to make the development plans of the North and the East so that women are included.
We need to hear their voice, and we need to have solutions that are co-created by the whole society with women in it as full actors, or otherwise we will continue to come up with options and theoretical solutions that are not necessarily viable, as you rightly said. The conversation can last until tomorrow morning, and it's very stimulating for me personally, and I'm sure for everyone around the table today in the room. But the time has come to an end, unfortunately. There are a few questions in the question and answer section, and as I said earlier, we will make sure that we will come back to you with answers to these questions via our organizers for the session today. But it's been a real honor to be in your audience, Dr. Fernandopulo and Dr. Kumaraswamy. It's sharing the experience and the expertise is not often as available as, and you came in with a lot of generosity to share your thoughts and experience. This conversation today is just the start, because I believe it's very important that it should continue between experts and practitioners, and it's really meant to spark further conversations amongst communities and family members. So we really urge those who have tuned in to this conversation to continue to discuss this, that as a country, we become more invested in encouraging and supporting women to enter places of power and lead, and to create spaces for equal representation. We genuinely believe that there will be no better tomorrow if women are still not at the table. Dr. Kumaraswamy, Dr. Fernandopulo, and all the participants in the room today, we're very grateful to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.